The state's motion that we filed, yes, Your Honor.
Judge, Ms. Ferranti, go ahead.
I was not present yesterday in case which you did request time. I was not CC'd by the state on the initial email, I believe, on Sunday night when I was made aware of it. So I'm in the process of preparing a response, and I anticipate submitting that by tomorrow morning.
All right. So, I mean, because we're not having a trial tomorrow, I'm not available tomorrow to hear a motion tomorrow. So we have to do it Friday morning then, before Dr. Bob testifies.
Understood.
Judge, we actually anticipate, like, we subpoenaed the Seabright officer to be here today. We spoke to Seabright this morning. That's the only officer, I guess, they have on duty today. So they promised that he would be here Friday morning. So if we wanted to, I could call the Seabright officer first. That's not going to be very long. And then do whatever you prefer.
All right.
If I'm alive.
Well, maybe we'll do the same thing. Have the jury come at 9:30, do the motion at 9, and then whatever order you call the witnesses, fine.
Whatever you prefer.
I mean, it's a relatively discreet request for relief by the state. It's not a sweeping request for relief. It's only as to a few comments in the report. So,
and I believe, like I said yesterday, even if you ruled against us, it's a 2-minute conversation with Dr. Bonnet.
agreed. Okay. All right, so then today we'll be releasing this jury probably by lunchtime, I would imagine, if not sooner. Any objection if I tell them that regardless of whoever testifies on Friday, I'm not going to keep them all day so they can plan their life, that we're going to let them out of here before the end of the day in rush hour?
Yeah, whatever, like we discussed yesterday, Judge, whatever you prefer.
Okay with the state?
There's no objection, Judge.
All right, I appreciate that. All right, still nothing from jury assembly. It's 9:26, so we call the jury's report at 9:30. Any other comments or issues about the jury charge we discussed yesterday?
No, Your Honor. I did speak with Ms. Lento this morning, and we're going to discuss, we'll discuss it later about the endangering the welfare.
All right. I don't mean to be particular, but I don't want to have all of us stay here till late on Friday either, if we can help it. So the whole idea of doing the charge conference in advance and all these things is to avoid that issue for everybody. Officers, spectators, court staff, all those kind of things. You know, I had most of my staff wanted to take off on Friday. They put in that request in January, like the only day they put in the beginning of the year to take off, and we're all canceling that. So that's fine. That's part of our job, but that doesn't mean that I can't get case law. There's a kind of a shortage of case law coming from the attorneys sometimes as to these requests. So
I don't think it's going to be an issue.
all right. And I appreciate that. I appreciate yesterday that we discussed it, and I've been researching it, so I would be prepared to have a hearing on it today. But again, we'll defer until such time as everybody's ready. All right. Any other issues we need to discuss?
No, thank you, none from the
All
state.
right. So no one's brought up to me any concerns about what Dr. Feingold's going to testify to. No one's given me Dr. Feingold's report. So if there's any surprises or objections, I haven't been getting any kind of notice. So while we're here now outside the presence of the jury, any concerns about something allegedly inadmissible in that report? Or all right. And then one other issue, presumably the state rests after Feingold's testimony, is that right?
Yes, Judge, subject to us reviewing certain items that we want to make sure are moved into evidence, the state would rest and then reserve its right to call any witnesses on rebuttal.
All right. The reason I ask is because of items in evidence. That there's sometimes that you sort of skipped over certain things. I don't know if that was intentional or some of them may. Obviously, not every exhibit gets admitted into evidence. Many are just for identification. But do you have the updated exhibit list that the clerk's been keeping?
I do not, Your Honor. I have my crazy color-coded one.
All right. Madam Clerk, can you make copies for counsel? The clerk has been keeping a meticulous list of as have I, but fortunately she's been retyping it each day. So it has the date, each document was marked for ID, the date was admitted into evidence, and the time that I admitted each exhibit into evidence. So I prefer you look at the court's copy, just in case maybe you thought you moved something and we didn't pick it up, or vice versa. Make sure we're all on the same page as to what's actually in evidence, because as you know, whatever's in evidence goes in the jury room with the jury, and there's a lot of exhibits at this point. Over total exhibits. All right, since it's 9:31, why don't we go over to get them? Hopefully they'll be either here or arriving as you get over there, so. I'll advise you right now, on the way.
That's up to you.
we'll let them go in the jury room and get settled. Let them get settled in the jury room, then probably we can discuss it for a minute or two.
All right.
Morning. You go in the jury room and get settled for a few minutes. Morning, sir. Morning.
Here, give me them.
Please be seated. It's 9:41 a.m. The jury's in the jury room. We'll let them get settled for a minute. The state want to be heard about some exhibits?
Yes, Your Honor. S9, the state intended to move into evidence if it wasn't already done so. We'd like to ask to move S9 into evidence, that there was testimony from Sergeant Scuddy about that photograph, if I could show it to the court.
That's fine.
Yeah. No, this is S72. I'm sorry. It's a
That's
photograph.
S9?
S72, I apologize, is a photograph.
Right. Well, S9 is not in evidence either, so.
S9 is a text message.
Right.
There's testimony from Ms. Micciolo and Sergeant Coles about S9.
No, can I see that?
Right. I have 8 was moved in, and there was testimony about that on
Did you want?
the 30th, but the state never moved 9.
Yes, Judge. In the beginning, when I was doing the text messages, I was going to move them in at the end, but then we talked about it, and Your Honor wanted me to start moving them in. So S9 was supposed to be moved into evidence. There was testimony about it. She read it.
Right. All the ones around it
Yes.
were S7, S8, S10, and 11 were moved in. Any objection to 9?
Which one is right?
Can I have it?
It just shows the council.
Mary.
Judge, I believe the only objection is something the defense pointed out on cross-examination, was that the context of the text message is not listed in S9, the before and after. So the jury is not getting the whole story, and in terms of accuracy, we believe it's inaccurate.
Judge, I think that the context argument was made about text
1
messages
second, please.
that occurred at Jersey Shore Medical Center the night before, and counsel had the opportunity to and did read into the record themselves in front of the jury all of the surrounding text messages. If they left any out, then that was, their choice on cross-examination to do that.
It's the people's exhibit, the state's exhibit, Judge. So at this point, if they're asking to move it, that's the defense objection.
But Mr. Bellucci
Do you want to hang on, please?
confronted Ms. Micciolo with the entire conversation of messages and, in fact, even said on the record. So this is the whole story, not just a snippet the state wanted to give you. Correct?
Yes.
All right. So that exhibit is no different than all the other exhibits which were admitted without objection. So the defense wants to move in its own exhibits, it can. But in terms of whether S9 should be in evidence, I find it's appropriate based upon Ms. Mitchell's testimony and my rulings on all the exhibits surrounding it. So S9 in evidence. And then you want to go to S72?
Yes, Your Honor, S72, that would have been Sergeant Scuddy. And I thought I had moved them in as a group with the surrounding photographs.
You moved in 71. Actually, a whole bunch of them. 67, 68, 69, 70, and 71.
And then I think there was a second group
And then you moved in,
of 72, 73, and 75, 6, 7, 8, 9, 80. 74 was referred to at a separate
I
time.
think the problem with that is, the header on your exhibit, it kind of,
That's the header that was on the court's exhibit. When I made the sheet, 72 was still on this page, and I just think when it went on to the next page, in the
I have-
court's
I have
one, it
70
left a blank line.
I have S-72 moved into evidence on May 2nd at 12:07 p.m.
Okay, that's what my understanding was,
But
Your Honor.
it's not on
Okay.
I think it got omitted somehow.
I think it was just a computer issue.
Right, it's on the bottom of page 2, it ends with S-71, the top of page 3 starts with S-73, so. And S-73 was moved in at the same time, 12:07, and so was S-74.
Judge, may I approach your clerk, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, Madam Clerk, can we add that?
Yeah.
Photo.
The last one was S-123. Yes. And that was through the testimony of Sergeant Coles, Your Honor, the call log, which he testified to every single thing on it.
So I have that by Sergeant Coles on May 7 at 12:03. So, Madam Clerk, can you add that as well?
Yes, thank you. And that was it for the discrepancies between my notes and the other notes.
All right, very good, thank you. Anything else before getting the jury up?
No, Judge, thank you.
Jury out.
All rise.
9:47 out.
Did you have to talk to me?
Please be seated, everyone. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for all your cooperation. Any concerns or issues you need to bring to my attention? Great news. Seeing none, we're going to continue with the witness from the state today. To give you a little idea of our schedule, we probably won't go all day today. And then there are one or more witnesses anticipated for Friday. Originally, I think I told you that I probably wasn't going to have any trial this Friday. Turns out tomorrow there are witness scheduling issues, so we can't have any witnesses tomorrow. So I said to the attorneys yesterday, we had met yesterday, discussed some things outside your presence, that you've been so cooperative and understanding with our difficult schedule, that the last thing I want to do is have you here on Friday at 4:30 in rush hour before Memorial Day weekend, getting stuck in traffic on all of our highways with people coming for the long weekend. So regardless of what happens Friday, if we still have witnesses to go, those can go to Tuesday, is my view. We're not going to keep you here. So we'll play it by ear about how the morning goes, whether we go to the afternoon or not. But if we do go to the afternoon, we're going to end early, because I'm not going to do that to you. I don't want to do that to you. I don't think we've stayed really late any day, so why pick that day to stay late, is what I said to the attorney. So that's our plan, and I appreciate your understanding, but we agreed I should give you some advance notice, so if you're planning personal things, family things for the weekend, you'd have some idea that you won't be here to the bitter end on Friday afternoon. All right, thank you. With that, the state has a witness for today, Ms. Trump.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would like to call Dr. Annette Feingold.
Dr. Feingold.
Dr. Feingold.
Good morning, doctor. Come on in. Just come up here and watch your step. Good morning. If you can face the court reporter, raise your right hand. The court reporter will swear or affirm you in.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Thank you. Have a seat, please. State your name and spell both of your names.
First, let me just untangle my hair, sorry. My name is Annette Feingold, and the spelling of my last name is Feingold.
And your first name is spelled?
Anat.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Trump.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Feingold, everything in this room is recorded, so you almost have to shout to have the speakers pick it up.
Okay.
Except for the rustling of papers.
All right.
So, can you tell the jurors what type of doctor you are?
So I'm a pediatrician who is trained specifically in the care of children with infections. So I'm specialized in pediatric infectious disease.
Do you have a CV?
Yes,
Would that aid you in going over your qualifications right now?
absolutely.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness, please?
Certainly, yeah.
Want to see it, Mary? I'm approaching you with S-160 for identification. Is this your CV?
It is.
Would that help you?
Yes, because I'm old and don't remember most of this anymore.
What is your present title?
I'm an associate professor of pediatrics at the Cooper University Hospital and Cooper Medical School of Rowan University in Camden, New Jersey.
And where is that? That's all located in Camden, New Jersey, down south.
Right.
Are you currently a practicing physician?
Absolutely. I'm a full-time physician taking care of children with infections in the Cooper system, and I'm also spend a great deal of time at the medical school teaching the medical students, and I also am the associate program director for our pediatric residency program, so I'm involved in training our pediatric residents.
Where did you receive your undergraduate education?
I graduated from Dartmouth College in New Hampshire.
And what type of degree did you receive from Dartmouth?
I received a Bachelor of Arts.
Could you tell the jurors about your graduate education, please?
Yes. After finishing college, I attended medical school at Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. And at the end of that, I began my pediatric residency at Montefiore Medical Center, part of the Albert Einstein School of Medicine in the Bronx in New York City.
Do you have an MD?
I have an MD, yes.
And then do you have any other degrees that you obtained after that?
Yes, after completing my pediatric residency, I was what's called a fellow. So I trained an additional 2 years in a program called social medicine and epidemiology at the hospital. And as part of that fellowship, I was enrolled at the School of Public Health at Columbia University and received my Master's of Public Health during that time.
When was that?
That was from July 86 to June of 88.
And what defines something as pediatric? Is there a certain age group?
Yeah, in general, it's anything from sometimes being involved in the care of a fetus, if there are issues with the mom and infection, all the way up to, it varies, but usually around age 20, 21. Some institutions will take care of young people up to 22 years of age as pediatric patients.
What is the term, I think you use, epidemiology?
Epidemiology is the study of what diseases occur in which group of people, and the goal of epidemiology is to understand why certain groups of people get certain diseases and what we can do to intervene and make that process better, or it's used widely to study medical conditions.
And you told us about the fellowship in clinical epidemiology at Montefiore Medical Center. Did you do another fellowship after that?
Yes. After returning from abroad for a year, I did a fellowship in pediatric infectious disease for 3 years at St. Christopher's Hospital for Children in Philadelphia. And at the end of that, I was already certified by the American Board of Pediatrics, but at the end of that fellowship, I passed the exam and became certified as a specialist in pediatric infectious disease.
Okay, I'll probably take you back to that because I have some other questions. What actually is the definition of an infectious disease? Or how is it described?
An infectious disease in general is a disease caused by some sort of germ that can be variable, either bacteria like a strep throat or a virus like the infamous COVID, parasites, fungi, but to a large extent it's evaluating patients who may be infected by a germ or may have an abnormal reaction to a germ. But it includes things like understanding and working on vaccines and means to prevent infections. So it's really quite a broad field.
And the end of the definition that you gave, is that where you get into like the field of immunology?
Yes, well, there are people who are actually specifically immunologists who really limit their practice to people with sort of allergic and diseases or diseases associated with abnormal immune system. Because of when I trained, I spent a great deal of time taking care of children and actually adults with HIV infection. And that early on was really sort of the realm of the immunologists because it was, obviously attacks the immune system. But in general, people, there's quite a bit of overlap between infections and immunology and immunologic problems.
Oh, is pediatric infectious disease in particular distinguished from general infectious disease?
Yes. We have a lot of overlap in what we do, but the population of patients that we take care of is obviously very different. So most infectious disease doctors who are trained as internists will only take care of adults with infectious disease and leave the pediatric patients to us because children respond differently to different infections, and sometimes how old you are distinguishes how you might respond to a certain kind of infection.
So is it a particular or specialized field, pediatric infectious disease?
It is. It's recognized as an individual specialty. It has its own certifying body, and I have to maintain my certification and continuing medical education and examinations to maintain my my status as a pediatric infectious disease physician.
Would it be fair to say that it's a relatively small community of doctors within pediatric infectious disease?
Yes, there are not that many of us. We're in need of many, many more.
Approximately what year or how long did you begin seeing pediatric patients?
In 1983 is when I started my pediatric residency, which is a 3-year training program. So that was when I really shifted from medical school to taking care of exclusively children, and I've been practicing ever since.
So if you could, over that span of time, approximately how many pediatric patients have you seen?
I don't really know a specific number. I haven't been counting, but it's probably in the thousands.
Now, how do you, as a pediatric infectious disease specialist, become involved in a child's care?
There are a number of ways. Sometimes children are diagnosed with something and their parents want us to see them so that they know that they're getting sort of the most advanced care. So we see a lot of kids who are self-referred by their parents with Lyme disease or other infections. But a lot of the work we do with patients in the hospital is that they're admitted to a general pediatric service, or they're in the ICU, the pediatric ICU, or the trauma ICU, or the neonatal intensive care ICU. And then if there's concern that they may have an infection, or if they have a documented infection, then we're asked to evaluate the patient and make recommendations.
What then would one of your assessments entail?
So the first thing we usually start with is the history. So we generally try to talk to the parents, of course, or the patient themselves if they're old enough to give us a history. We examine the patient very thoroughly, and then we review the entire clinical course, what's happened from when a child was last well until the date that we're seeing them. We then review all the laboratory data that's available. We review all the imaging, whatever radiology studies have been done. And then we make an assessment of what is likely, what is needed, if further testing is indicated, if the child should be treated in a specific way, and for how long. And we often are the ones who see that child in follow-up, because the people taking care of the patients in the hospital don't see children once they've been discharged. So if somebody goes home on antibiotics for a bone infection, we're the ones who will follow them with the orthopedic surgeons until they're completely healed and we can stop their antibiotic.
Are you kind of like the detectives of the medical profession?
That we've been described as such, for sure.
And have you been assigned to supervise other doctors throughout your career?
In my role as a resident, I always was involved in training the medical students and any resident younger than I. So as a second-year resident, I supervised the first-year resident as the third-year resident. And then as a pediatric infectious disease fellow, I was involved in training the residents. And I continue to do that both with medical students and the people studying to be pediatricians.
If you could, about how many doctors do you think you've supervised throughout your career?
That would also be at least over 1,000, I believe.
Have you had any academic appointments?
Yes. Wherever I was employed, I had, once I finished my pediatric residency, I had an academic appointment, usually as an assistant clinical professor at Cooper Medical School of Rowan University. I'm an associate professor of pediatrics.
Have you had any hospital appointments?
That's essentially the hospital appointment.
That's what that means?
Yes.
And what, if any, certifications do you hold?
I'm not sure what you mean by certification.
Are you board certified?
I'm board certified in pediatrics, and I'm board certified in pediatric infectious disease.
And are those current certifications?
Yes.
How do you maintain those?
So I've been sort of grandfathered in. I did mention I'm pretty old, so I don't have to recertify in pediatrics, general pediatrics, but I have what are called maintenance of certification requirements for pediatric infectious disease. So I'm sent quarterly a group of questions that I have to answer on a computer program and to maintain, and that happens every quarter continuously. And those are questions usually based on the most recent literature. So I have to stay up with what's current in order to pass that certification examination.
And are you a member of any professional organizations?
Yes, I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics. I'm a member of the Infectious Disease Society of America, also the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society of America.
Have you recently received any awards?
Recently. I've been yearly recognized by the top docs certificate, whatever it is, I don't know, called that by both in New Jersey and in Philadelphia. So top docs for pediatric infectious disease.
Have you been published in your field?
Yes. I published quite a bit when I was training as in clinical epidemiology, and I continue to publish now and then about generally with doing this with residents or medical students about interesting cases that we see to add to the literature.
And do you give lectures in your field?
Yes, that I've been doing that much more than publishing, really. I often ask to speak to groups of students, residents, attendings throughout South Jersey in general.
And have you ever been qualified as an expert in any court?
I never have.
That's not, you don't testify, that's not what you do.
This is the first time.
The state moves to qualify Dr. Annette Feingold as an expert in the field of pediatric infectious disease.
Thank you. Any questions from defense on the qualification?
1 second. None at all, Your Honor.
Thank you. I grant the state's application for Dr. Feingold to testify as an expert witness in pediatric infectious disease. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, I'm required to give you instruction with respect to expert witnesses. I know you've heard this before, but nevertheless, as a general rule, witnesses can only testify as to facts known by them. This rule ordinarily does not permit the opinion of a witness to be received as evidence. However, an exception to that rule exists in the case of an expert witness who may give her opinion as to any matter in which she is versed, which is material to the case. In legal terminology, an expert witness is a witness who has some specialized knowledge, skill, experience, or training that is not possessed by the ordinary juror, and who thus may be able to provide assistance to the jury in understanding the evidence presented and determining the facts of the case. In this case, the state has called Dr. Feingold as an expert witness in pediatric infectious disease. You are not bound by such experts' opinions, but you should consider each opinion and give it the weight to which you deem it is entitled, whether that be great or slight, or you may reject it. In examining each opinion, you may consider the reasons given for it, if any, and you may also consider the qualifications and credibility of the expert witness. It is always within the special function of the jury to determine whether the facts on which the answer or testimony of an expert is based actually exist. The value or weight of the opinion of the expert is dependent upon and is no stronger than the facts on which it is based. In other words, the probative value of the opinion will depend upon whether, from all the evidence in this case, you find that those facts are true. You may, in fact, determine from the evidence in the case that the facts that form the basis of the opinion are true, are not true, or are true in part only. And in light of such findings, you should decide what effect such determination has upon the weight of the evidence to be given to the opinion of the expert. Your acceptance or rejection of the expert opinion will depend, therefore, to some extent, on your findings as to the truth of the facts relied upon. The ultimate determination of whether or not the state has proven the defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is to be made only by the jury. And again, at the end of the case, I'll give you that instruction with respect to all the experts who testified in the matter. Ms. Schroll.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Feingold, were you contacted by the Ocean County Prosecutor's Office in regard to the death of Corey Micciolo?
I was. Excuse me, I was.
Were you asked to conduct a review and rendered an expert opinion in that case?
I have, yes.
Did you prepare a report?
I did.
Would having it in front of you help you with your testimony today?
Absolutely.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness, please?
Yes, of course. You don't have to ask.
Thank you. S-161. I'm showing you what's been marked for identification as S-161. Is that your report?
It is.
All right, I'm going to leave that with you. Dr. Feingold, did you have the chance to physically examine Corey?
I did not.
What did you review in reaching your opinion that you're here to give today?
I reviewed all the discovery that your office provided to me for the case.
And when you say all of the discovery, about how many documents did you review? Not just pages, but entire documents.
104 documents, pieces of evidence.
And did you review any electronic items of discovery provided to you?
Yes, I did.
About how many of those did you review?
Maybe another 30. I'm not sure what the number.
Now, were there certain records that were of particular importance to you?
Yes. In order to render an opinion, the specific records which I found most relevant to me were the timeline that was given of the occurrence of events, the autopsy report by Dr. Ragazza, and then specifically the 4 medical records from the institutions where Corey was examined at the Ivy Pediatrics, the Community Medical Center here in Toms River, Jersey Shore University Medical Center, and Southern Ocean Medical Center. I also reviewed the report by Dr. Catherine McCann's, the forensic report from Dr. Thomas Andrew, the forensic report from Dr. Michael Bagden, and the short movie clip video of when Corey's mom was speaking to him in the car, and all the medical labs, including the toxicology reports and microbiology reports that were available.
Did you review Dr. Ragazza's report as well?
I did. I mentioned that, I thought, yes.
And did you review, as part of those over 100 documents, police reports and statements and transcripts?
Absolutely.
And photographs?
Everything that was available to me.
Now, after you reviewed all of that material, did you render an opinion with respect to whether Corey died as a result of some infectious process?
I did.
And what was your opinion?
My opinion was that there was nothing available in all the discovery and the medical records that were consistent with infection causing Corey's death or even playing a role in it.
When you say nothing available, it didn't exist?
I didn't see anything that suggested infection.
And is that opinion to a medical degree of certainty?
Absolutely.
Now, did you review, or you said you reviewed the records from Ivy Pediatrics, right?
Yes.
And that would be by Dr. Deacon?
Yes.
Was there anything within those records that was important to you in regard to formulating your opinion that you're here to give?
Yes. So that visit occurred the day before Corey's death at about 5:20 in the evening, and at that time, Corey was described as having had no fever, no complaints of any kind of physical ailment other than the marks on his body for which his mom had sought evaluation. He was afebrile, so no fever. His vital signs were completely stable, and he, on physical exam, there was no abnormality, and in specific, the amount of oxygen in his blood was normal. He appeared to be completely well and have normal activity. His lung examination was completely clear, no abnormal sounds in the lungs. And so at that time, with a physician evaluating him, there was no evidence of any kind of infectious process.
And is it fair to say that was about 24 hours before Corey died?
Exactly.
Did you review the records from Community Medical Center?
I did.
And was there anything within those records that was important to you in regard to formulating your opinion?
Again, the findings were very similar. The vital signs were normal, meaning there was no elevation in his respiratory rate, in how quickly his heart was beating, and once again, he had no fever. In addition, he was described as alert, in no distress whatsoever, and his lungs were described as clear with no abnormal breath sounds, and so once again, and this was just a few hours later, but a second physician's evaluation found no evidence of an infectious process.
Now, what about his mouth and his throat? I'm not going to use the technical words because I'll definitely mispronounce them, but what about his mouth and his throat?
Right, his mouth looked normal. He had a normal amount of, sort of saliva and normal findings of his mucous membranes, and his throat was not red. There was no pus on his tonsils. So his exam was described as a normal, healthy child.
What about his lungs and his respirations at that time?
Right, his respiratory rate was normal. The oxygen in his blood was 100%, and he had no trouble breathing. He didn't work hard to breathe at all, and when they listened to him, there was no problem and no abnormal sounds or decreased sounds suggesting pneumonia. There was nothing in the lung exam there was nothing in the exam at all that they mentioned that suggested in any way that he had an infection.
And was all of that information up to that point important to you?
Yes, because what it was laying out was a time course, and so 24 hours before his death, he had no signs that he had an infection.
Did you review the medical records from Jersey Shore University Medical Center?
I did.
Was there anything within those records that was important to you in regard to formulating your opinion?
In addition to the findings that had been noted in the other visits, he had some laboratory work done at a Jersey Shore, which revealed a normal white count. So the sort of cells in his bloodstream that are fight infection were normal. That was a normal distribution of the kinds of cells that were there, and the only abnormality on his blood work was a slightly, sort of almost insignificantly elevated test of coagulation, the upper limit being 39, his was 40. That's really not anything we would pay attention to and consider sort of noise in the system. The other important information that was gathered at that visit was that Corey had no evidence of a significant viral infection, respiratory viral infection. So he was tested for COVID, he was tested for respiratory syncytial virus, he was tested for influenza A and B, and those were all negative. So again, the conclusion reading this was that he was, a well-appearing child other than the bruising that was noted, and he was described by the nurses as alert, appropriate, and walking normally with a steady gait. So again, this being the third evaluation, so we have three, physical examinations by physicians all of whom believed that this child was, and he did, look completely healthy, other than the bruising.
Do you recall approximately what time the blood was taken from Corey at Jersey Shore University Medical Center?
It looked like it was drawn around almost 11 p.m. Not quite, but
All right.
10 minutes shy of 11 p.m.
And so you went over there being a skeletal survey.
I didn't mention that, but there was no evidence of fractures from, I didn't mention it here, but the skeletal survey was read as normal.
And no evidence of anything wrong with Corey's lungs at that time.
That wasn't mentioned specifically. I think had the radiologist seen anything in the lungs, he or she might have noted it, but that's not what that study concentrates on.
I understand. And so you mentioned the white blood cell count. Why is that measured?
The white blood cell count is measured because you can often find evidence of either inflammation, a stress response to a number of things, one of which can be infection, and that the white count may reflect changes suggesting that.
And you talked about the different cells that make up a white blood cell count. Could you
So
explain
there are
that?
two major populations of white blood cells. the neutrophils or granulocytes, which are the cells that typically respond to a bacterial infection, and then the lymphocytes, which are a different group of white blood cells that typically are elevated in viral infections in general. These are just broad general terms that can, in specific circumstances, things can be different all the time.
So what about the neutrophils and the lymphocytes in Corey's white blood cell count when he was at Jersey Shore less than 24 hours before he was pronounced?
They were completely normal, and the distribution was normal. There was nothing striking. It just looked like a normal child CBC, complete blood count.
And you mentioned that everything else in the blood work, as far as you're concerned, was normal and unconcerning.
Right.
Was there anything within those Jersey Shore records that was important to you in regard to formulating your opinion, or what did that mean to you, Jersey Shore records?
Right. Well, the concern is that typically children develop pneumonia following a respiratory viral infection. That the virus sets them up to get a bacteria into the lungs that can cause infection. And at this juncture, not only was he afebrile, looking completely well, he had no evidence of typical respiratory virus. Now, they didn't test for all of them that are possible, but the big four that we worry about were ruled out at this visit.
Now, taken together, what, if any, significance did you assign then to those 3 medical evaluations that Corey had, the 2 that occurred on April 1st, and then one that started in the late hours on April 2nd and ended in the early morning hours, in the late hours of April 1st and ended in the early morning hours of April 2nd?
So just, reviewing this history, that this child was seen 3 separate occasions by 3 physicians, and nobody felt that he had any sign of infection and that there was anything wrong other than the bruising. And so at this point, when he leaves the Jersey Shore Medical Center at, I think it was 1 a.m. on the 2nd, he's a well-appearing child from an infectious disease point of view. He has no evidence of having an infection.
Now, in addition to the medical records, was the case history here important to you?
Yes. What the information that was reported was that Corey went home with his mom and went to sleep, and the next morning, according obviously to the mom and the grandma, the maternal grandmother, he looked well in the morning. And it was reported that he ate breakfast, bagel and yogurt, I believe. Children who are sick, and typically children who have fever or have a significant infection, have what we call anorexia. They don't want to eat. I mean, a lot of us don't want to eat when we feel really sick. So similarly, kids will not, wake up and eat their normal breakfast if they're ill or have a fever or are starting to get an important infection. It's just unusual.
Now, you had mentioned in the discovery that you reviewed that there was a video of particular importance to you. Could you tell us about that? When I listened to the 33-second clip that was taken in the car, Corey spoke, not a lot, but he spoke to his mom, and he had no shortness of breath. So, sometimes when people will call us and say their child is having trouble breathing, and we'll say put the child on the phone and see if they can give a full sentence without having to take a breath. Or the other thing that was notable was that he never coughed, and you never heard any other sounds except for the mom and Corey speaking. There was no wheezing heard or anything like that. But just he clearly was speaking normally by report, and by the video he sounded
like, a regular healthy kid.
So there's no moaning in that video that you
No.
heard?
No, none.
Now, if someone had actually been suffering from an infection, a real infection, what would you have expected to be different?
It would be unusual even for 33 seconds to go by for a child who had a significant pneumonia not to cough, or when they spoke to sound short of breath. To some extent, you can usually hear that in a child's voice.
So would you expect that a person that was sick with an infection would have trouble talking like you described, or walking, or climbing a set of stairs?
Yes, if somebody has a significant pneumonia, they get short of breath trying to do those things.
Now, what is your impression of Corey's condition later in the afternoon of April 2nd when he was brought to Southern Ocean Medical Center?
Well, at that time, he was obviously critically ill. He was described as ashen and very pale. He had what we call altered mental status, so he wasn't appropriately awake. He was described as somnolent, so that suggests maybe that something's going on in his head, or he's not perfusing well. He was disoriented. He was difficult to arouse. But despite those sort of severe symptoms that are extremely concerning, he had they described no abnormality on his listening to his chest. And they did say that he was breathing quickly, but there was no distress, respiratory distress, no retractions. That's when you pull so hard to bring air in that you can see, the ribs or the muscles. You can see the muscles of the neck working to help. And there was no wheezing, no crackles associated with pneumonia, no abnormality on the lung exam to suggest a pulmonary infection.
And those are all things that you would expect to see from someone that had a pulmonary infection.
Yeah, absolutely. And also somebody who comes in looking this ill, if this was due to a pulmonary infection, I would expect very significant changes in the ability to breathe and his pulmonary exam.
Now, are you familiar with the term agonal breathing?
Yes.
Could you tell the jury from your standpoint what that means generally?
Agonal breathing is the kind of breathing that you see when somebody's really sort of pre-morbid, really on their way out. And it's like a big short breath. They might gurgle, and it's a sort of a distinct kind of breathing that happens very close to death, and is usually patients are usually not there with it at the time that they have that kind of breathing.
And that's not like the wheezing or crackling or anything that you
No,
just described?
no.
Did you have the chance to review and compare the lab results that you talked about from Jersey Shore Medical Center late in the night on April 1st and the lab results obtained from Corey at Southern Ocean Medical Center on April 2nd?
Yes. And clearly the laboratory data was different. The white blood cell count was markedly elevated. And and there was a somewhat larger number of the neutrophil counts, those cells that I say often respond to a bacterial infection. And there were some premature forms, white cells that had come out of the bone marrow before they were completely mature. So that was different compared to the evening before when his white count was normal. In addition, his glucose was markedly elevated. The amount of base in his bloodstream was very low, so he was acidotic. His blood was, the pH of your blood is something that your body tries to maintain all the time around a normal value, like about 7. And his was low, and we know that because the amount of base there was very low, and the amount of lactic acid there was very high. So this occurs anytime, or can occur anytime you are critically ill. And the message to your brain when your blood is acid is breathe quickly. Try to get out the CO2 as much as possible so that we get back to a regular balance of the pH. So patients, we see this all the time in children with diabetic ketoacidosis, kids with diabetes who come in and they have too much acid, they're often breathing very quickly.
So when you talked about shortness of breath and tachypnea earlier, that has to do with Corey being acidotic.
I believe that was the explanation for his tachypnea in this situation.
All right. And you said that you compared the white blood cell count from Jersey Shore to the white blood cell count at Southern Ocean Medical Center. What was the difference?
The difference was that he had a much more elevated white blood cell count.
Do you recall what it was at Jersey Shore?
It was 7.5, and here it was 29.9. So
that's a large increase?
Yes, that's a very large increase.
And did the neutrophils and the lymphocytes that you defined earlier, did those shift?
They shifted, yes. He had more neutrophils and more of these immature cells in the bloodstream.
Is an immature cell a monocyte or a band?
A band.
A band. Okay. Now, what are the laboratory changes noted in Corey consistent with, in your opinion?
So, in my opinion, these labs in Corey, putting them all together, are a response to a giant surge of epinephrine. So that's a stress response. So if the body's put under a very stressful situation, this happens with, it certainly can happen with infection, but it can happen with any number of things, including blunt trauma is a well-described cause of, Cooper, we have a lot of trauma patients. We're really the trauma center for South Jersey. And patients that come in with trauma always have very elevated white count because anytime you surge your epinephrine, you release a lot of these cells into the bloodstream. The other things that really suggest that are the elevated glucose. So Corey's glucose was 400. That wasn't because he had diabetes. It was because he had this surge of epinephrine in response to whatever stressful event occurred, and that caused these changes in his blood counts.
Is elevation of a white blood cell count a specific or non-specific finding?
It's a non-specific finding. It can be a sign of infection, and we do look at it, but it's clearly not the only reason. Infection is not the only reason that a white blood cell count goes up.
What's like a specific finding versus like a non-specific finding, if you kind of explain what those two things are?
Well, a really specific finding would be finding bacteria in the bloodstream. That would be, proof that, or finding in bacteria in your urinary tract or in your spinal fluid. Those are really more definitive, evidence of infection. But it's all, you have to put the whole picture together.
And that's why you're referred to as a detective in your field.
There you go.
Objection.
Now,
Sustained.
did you review Dr. Ragas's report?
I did.
And did you agree with his interpretations? I
did not agree with his interpretation of the finding of Staph aureus. I can't comment on his, autopsy because that's nothing I am an expert in.
Was there a post-mortem CT scan conducted?
There was, and again, from my understanding, post-mortem CT scans are not helpful and not actually used in the diagnosis of pneumonia. So when you die, your blood, your cells that keep everything where it belongs, keeps the blood on one side and the air on the other side, keeps water where it's supposed to be. When you die, all those cells start to die, and the mechanism that where they transport things from one place to another disappear. So you're going to collapse your lungs. You're not going. There's nothing to hold air in your lungs, and the literature suggests that post-mortem CT scans, the only way they're valuable is if you go to the trouble of actually inflating the lungs. So, you keep the patient or the body, I guess at this point, intubated, and you put positive pressure to get air back into the lungs, and you hold that.
Judge, I'm going to object. She just stated that she's not an expert in forensic pathology.
This isn't pathology. I'm really talking about the.
I'm talking to the judge.
I'm sorry.
You want Gary to cycle? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I overruled the objection, but I have asked Ms. Strong to ask a few more questions to develop that area of testimony if it's appropriate. Ms. Strong.
Dr. Feingold, given all of the training and experience and the patients that you've seen that you've described already, from an infectious disease standpoint, is it significant to you whether a lung that's imaged is dead or alive?
Yes.
And could looking at a living lung, an insufflated lung, be helpful to you in determining some type of infection, giving all of your training and all of your experience?
Looking at an insufflated lung on an X-ray or a CT scan?
Yes.
Yes.
Looking at a living lung and then looking at a dead lung that's insufflated.
Yes, that might be helpful, but I've never seen it done.
Okay. Now, when you say you've never seen it done, could you tell us what you mean by that?
I've never reviewed a post-mortem CT scan, and I have never, in my experience, heard of it being ordered.
And is that because you just haven't looked at them, or is that because it's something that's not really done in your experience?
In my experience, that's not something that's done.
And you've reviewed CT scans as part of your job before, right?
All the time.
Now, what type of changes do the lungs go through, in your experience, from an infectious disease standpoint, after a person dies?
The lungs collapse and water leaks out of, and blood, because the cells that are supposed to keep things separate are no longer working. So what's described as sort of a wet lung. It just looks like it's filled with water because you can't tell, because there is no air to sort of see the difference between tissue and air. Or in a pneumonia, we often see significant abnormalities for significant pneumonias on a CAT scan in a living patient, because the rest of the lung looks like normal lung, and we contrast that with whatever findings are suggestive of pneumonia. But once the whole thing's collapsed, it just looks like kind of a big ball of water, sort of.
Do you recall about how long after Corey was pronounced that this imaging of the lungs was done?
I believe it was 3 hours.
So not immediately after
Right.
he was pronounced. From your perspective as a specialist in infectious disease, is there any value in a postmortem CT scan?
No. Can I just add that,
Objection.
to adding?
Doctor, why is there no value?
Sustained is the answer to the question, but Ms. Strong can ask other questions.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Why is there no value in that postmortem CT scan from your perspective?
Well, I'm just thinking that I want to make sure people understand that when patients die and we don't know why, we try very hard to figure that out using all the data we have available. And there's no evidence that CTing a lung after somebody's dead has been helpful in coming to a diagnosis.
So in your expert opinion, are the results of Corey's postmortem CT scan indicative of any type of pneumonia or infection?
They're uninterpretable.
Are you aware if there was a postmortem lung culture done?
There was.
Do you know what the result of that was?
Yes, that lung culture grew a bacteria called methicillin-sensitive Staph aureus in.
Now, what is that? Methicillin-sensitive Staph aureus.
Staph aureus is one of the most common bacteria around. It causes what we call suppurative infections characterized by pus. So boils and little abscesses, skin infections, but it can cause infections really anywhere. So it's a very common, but also bacteria that in fact lives on many people. In pediatric patients, you can swab kids' noses and find it about every 30 out of 100 kids will have Staph aureus just living on the front of their nose or the back of their throat without causing any problems. But it can, if it gets in the wrong place, it can make somebody very ill.
Now, could you tell the jurors if there's anything significant about the fact that this culture was done after Corey died as opposed to when he was living?
So the best way to explain this is just as I said that the CT scan doesn't help you post-mortem. A culture obtained after a patient's died doesn't help you in the course of and again, we try very hard to make a diagnosis in patients when certainly to figure out when they're alive how to treat them and to figure out when they're dead, you know, what the underlying cause was. And this has been studied, the value of post-mortem lung cultures, and they, because of the extremely high risk of contamination that occurs once you die and the breakdown of cells, that there's all the integrity of surfaces is lost and anything can sort of spread anywhere. In addition, when you intubate a patient because they're having an arrest, a cardiac arrest, and you then push air into their lungs, you can easily push whatever's in the back of their throat into their lung tissue as a, you know, because you're giving positive pressure, we call it. So that we don't know where that Staph aureus came from or what significance it has. And in the infectious disease world, there's no role for post-mortem cultures because of these issues, that they're so frequently contaminated and they haven't correlated with what has actually caused a patient's death or even an infectious death.
So is it fair to say that this post-mortem cultures or testing, it's not an accurate means of diagnosing pneumonia from your perspective?
Exactly. It is not.
Or other infection?
Because of the loss of integrity of all the cell surfaces and all the borders that make up our body between the bloodstream and the tissues or within tissues, that it starts occurring almost immediately after you die, in the infectious disease world, there's no value placed on post-mortem cultures.
Now, what would be the normal clinical course of a Staph aureus pneumonia, that type of bacteria causing pneumonia?
Right. So I've treated many children with Staph aureus pneumonia. As I mentioned, it frequently complicates respiratory illness, in particular influenza. But the typical clinical course is a child who's had some febrile illness, presumably some virus, and then has higher fever, develops more respiratory distress, trouble breathing, really over days becomes quite ill. And generally when we see kids with Staph aureus pneumonia, they have gross abnormalities on their chest x-ray, but they also have very abnormal exams when you listen to them. There's areas where you don't hear any breath sounds because the pneumonia has filled that space where you're listening with your stethoscope. The other thing that's very common with Staph aureus pneumonia is to have what's called an empyema, which is a collection of pus between the lung and the chest wall. So we often have to stick a tube in there to drain all that pus so that the lung can expand. We often have to put chemicals in there that break up all the adhesions because, it's pus and it's very thick and hard to suck out. So this is usually a clinical disease that starts and then over days and maybe even as much as a week will get worse and worse until the child comes to medical attention. And when they show up, they have high fever, they have abnormal lung exams, they're having trouble breathing, they have stopped eating, they're quite ill, but it's and that's really what how we generally see this disease progress.
And Corey didn't have any of those things.
Had none of those things.
And you yourself have actually treated children that find themselves with Staph aureus pneumonia.
Absolutely.
Do you know if there was a blood culture done?
There was a blood culture done shortly after Corey presented to the emergency department at Southern Ocean Medical Center. In fact, that blood culture was obtained at 4:13, less than an hour prior to his death.
And you had said earlier that blood cultures are actually something that could lead to a specific finding instead of these other non-specific things that we've discussed, correct?
Yes.
Now, what exactly is a blood culture?
So what happens is that whoever obtains the blood culture cleans the skin very well with alcohol or iodine to remove whatever things are living on your skin. And then blood is drawn and it's put into tubes that have growth factors so that, if a bacteria is in the blood, normally your blood is sterile, but if there are bacteria in your blood, they have what they need to grow. And those cultures are then put into an incubator, and that blood culture is monitored for 5 days to see if any bacteria grow in that blood that's sent to the microbiology lab. And if something grows, they take that bottle, they do a gram stain, and then they do it all through technology. They have machines that will identify the organism that's causing the infection.
Did anything grow in Corey's blood?
His blood cultures were negative.
What does that mean to you?
To me, it rules out Staph aureus sepsis as a cause of death in this patient. Any one of us who is about to die from Staph aureus sepsis less than an hour before our death, we'll have Staph aureus in our bloodstream. It means the system has been overwhelmed. So you can have Staph aureus pneumonia without having a positive blood culture. But if you say that patient then developed sepsis, so had the bloodstream contaminated with that bacteria, that's invariably going to be there as you approach sort of the end of your course. So to me, that's one of the most specific pieces of evidence that this was not an infectious death due to Staph aureus. Staph aureus is a bacteria that's very easy to grow. It's not one of these bugs that we sometimes have trouble growing or identifying. So that close to 45 or 50 minutes before Corey died, he had no bacteria in his bloodstream, which, if this was a Staph aureus sepsis death, should have been teeming with the bacteria. The fact that it wasn't there, to me, means that this was not the diagnosis.
So is like the bacteria in the blood, is that kind of like the missing link between the pneumonia and a sepsis?
Exactly. So sepsis occurs when bacteria get into the bloodstream, and then it sets off this cascade of an inflammation in the body. And that's what, it's actually our immune response that makes us so sick, not just the bacteria, but the bacteria cause all these toxins to be elaborated.
So is that what sepsis actually is, what you just described?
Exactly.
So this negative blood culture is then completely inconsistent with sepsis.
Exactly. With bacterial sepsis.
Now, why are all of the circumstances present in Corey's particular case not indicative of an infection like pneumonia?
Neither Dr. Ragazza nor Dr. Andrew found evidence of essentially infection in the lung, pus in the lung, tissue death, necrotic lung. There was some hemorrhage, but if you die from a Staph aureus pneumonia that then gets into your bloodstream to ultimately kill you, you would expect on autopsy to have lungs that have been, battered by Staph aureus, that have had pus fill the air spaces, have made abscesses in the lung. None of those findings were described in the pathologist's evaluation. And there was the clinical story, the course just doesn't make sense for infection. You get seen 3 times right up to the very end, and nobody thinks you're sick. And then you come in and you're premorbid. That's not how Staph aureus infection acts. That's not what, and I've been taking care of children for 40 years, and the last 30 as an infectious disease doctor. I see every case of Staph aureus pneumonia that we see in the pediatrics department, and nobody presents like this. Kids don't come in and die from Staph aureus sepsis without some prologue and some leading up to it, and being sick before they, become so ill that they need help to manage their sepsis. And the lungs show tissue destruction, necrotic lung, purulent collections.
So in sum, Dr. Feingold, what, if any, conclusions did you reach whether an infection caused or contributed to Corey's death?
My conclusion was that there was no evidence that Corey had an infectious disease at any point, and certainly that was not his cause of death.
I have no additional questions for the witness, Your Honor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like a morning break? Take a couple minutes? Sure. So it's 11:01. Just knock on the door when you're ready, but give us a few minutes as well. Please don't discuss the case. Doctor, thank you. You just be patient and not discuss your testimony with anybody.
Of course.
Thank you, ma'am. Absolutely, sure. Absolutely, ma'am. 11:02 a.m. The jury's in the jury waiting from counsel outside the presence of the jury.
I'll wait till they're ready.
All right, I'm going to take a short break and I'll be back out.
Thank you, Judge.
We're back on the record, 11:19 a.m. The jury's knocked on the door and indicated they're ready. Anything before the jury comes out?
No, Your Honor.
All right, jury out, please.
Jury out.
Okay, thank you. Please be seated, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue with the cross-examination of Dr. Feingold. Mr. Bush.
Thank you, Judge. How are you, Doctor?
I'm all right.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
I'm all right.
All right. So, why do we have forensic pathologists?
Objection, Judge. Is it a quiz?
No, it's a question. Why do we have forensic pathologists?
Sarcastic, Judge.
I mean, if you're telling me
Your Honor, I just wanted to hear Your Honor's ruling on my objection.
Well, it's somewhat argumentative, I suppose, but you can ask her understanding of that if you want. You start to ask another question. So you were drawing that question?
I'll
moving
withdraw
on to
that
another
question. So, a forensic pathologist took blood cultures and you said that they're not reliable. Forensic pathologist took a CAT scan, you said that's not reliable, right?
I disagree with your first statement. Forensics pathologists don't take blood cultures. Physicians treating patients
Okay,
take blood cultures
okay.
when they present, or when they're in the hospital.
But you disagreed with some of the things that Dr. Odassa did, right? You said they were of no value.
I disagreed with a post-mortem lung culture.
Okay. You said it was of no value.
Right.
And the CAT scan of no value.
My understanding was that the CAT scan was ordered by someone else, but I might be wrong about that.
Okay.
But yes, that it's not interpretable.
So, how many dead bodies have you worked on?
Have I worked?
Yeah, recently.
No.
No. When was the last time you did an autopsy?
The last time I did an autopsy was when I was in medical school.
And that was what, 10 years ago?
Well, thank you. But no, it was in 1979.
1979. So that was the last time you did an autopsy, right? So you have no experience in forensic pathology.
That's right.
You have no experience in working on dead people.
No, luckily most of my patients are alive when I take care of them.
Okay. And most of your patients are young.
Right.
All of your patients are young.
I would have you tell me what young means to you.
I'm sorry, I thought you said you're a pediatrician. I'm just a lawyer. What do pediatricians work on?
We take care of primarily children, but I take care of 34 and 40-year-old patients who acquired HIV as children. So you might say that I take care of some people who are not young.
What percentage of your practice is dedicated to adults as opposed to pediatrics?
About probably 8%, in that ballpark.
So 92% of your practice is dedicated to living children,
That's true.
not dead children.
Yes.
So now you read, I'm assuming, maybe I'm assuming wrong, but you read through a lot of the materials, right? You went through a list with Micciolo about all the materials you read in this case, right?
All the discovery that I was asked to review.
Okay. And who asked you to review it?
The prosecutor's office.
Okay. And as part of that, did you review, you know who Dr. Odassa is, right?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I know from what I've read that,
Okay. Was he the medical examiner in this case?
yes.
So, Do you remember reading anything from a Dr. Larkin?
I don't believe I did.
Okay. So do you recall reviewing any reports that Dr. Larkin ordered?
I believe that Dr. Larkin ordered, I think I read that Dr. Larkin ordered the CT scan.
So then you do know who Dr. Larkin is.
I just know the name, that I read it once.
Do you know if he requested any other exams?
I know that there was toxicology done, and I don't know who ordered that, but I only think, as recall seeing his name in regards to the CT scan.
So you don't recall whether Dr. Larkin ordered any other tests?
I don't.
So now, you got paid, right, to review this case?
Not yet, but yes,
You're going to get paid for reviewing the documents provided to you by the prosecution, right?
I expect yes.
Okay. And you're going to get paid for discussing it with them, right? Or did you meet with Ms. Schran or Ms. Lento prior to walking through those doors?
Yes,
Okay. And when you met with them, did they discuss the case with you?
yes,
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if either one of them, I'm assuming neither one of them have any medical degrees. So did you explain to them the medical technology?
yes,
You did so right here. When Ms. Schran asked you a question, you actually corrected her on the words she used, right?
not on the word, but on the pronunciation of the word.
And I'm sure you're going to do that often to me right now. So, and you're actually getting paid to sit right here and testify for them, right? Or you expect to be, right?
Yes,
Okay. Do you know how the medical examiner's office works?
what I understand is that the medical examiner is hired by the state, and when an autopsy is indicated, there's a question as to a patient, whether the death was natural or unnatural, then the case can be referred to the medical examiner to try to make that determination.
So you said something very interesting. You said that the medical examiner is paid by the state, right?
That's what I understand,
Okay, not paid by the prosecution.
as far as I know.
So the medical examiner in this case was Dr. Lagasse, right?
Objection, Judge, misinterpreting. Can we go to sidebar, Your Honor?
Sure. gentleman, Mr. Blue's going to rephrase the question. We'll continue. Thank you for your patience.
Did Dr. Ragazza perform the autopsy on Corey?
Yes,
Okay. And did you review the autopsy report prepared by Dr. Ragazza?
I did.
Did you also review the death certificate that Dr. Ragazza prepared? The original death certificate?
Yes, I
Okay.
believe I did.
Okay. Do you recall that the original death certificate that Dr. Ragazza created found that the cause of death was due to cardiac arrest?
Yes,
Okay. Do you recall that Dr. Ragazza, the person who did the autopsy in this case, found the manner of death in his initial report to be undetermined?
yes,
Okay. Now, before you testified here, you actually on direct examination said that you reviewed Dr. Andrews' report.
yes,
Okay. And do you know who Dr. Andrews is?
yes,
Okay. Did you review his testimony prior to testifying here today?
I did not.
Do you know what the manners of death are? I know that you're not a forensic pathologist, but do you know what the manners of death are?
Objection, Judge. We're getting outside the scope of what she testified is her area of expertise. We're talking about forensic pathology, and she's an infectious disease specialist.
Judge,
Even talking about causes of death, she's an infectious disease specialist, and she ruled one out, not determined one.
Yeah.
Overruled. It goes to her knowledge. She
Thank you.
testified as to sepsis not causing it, so it's a permissive question.
Do you know what the 5 manners of death are?
I think I have heard them. I'm
Okay.
not an
You
expert
don't know
on them.
them. You don't know them, right?
No, I could come up with most of them, I believe.
Well, I would want you to do something that you don't know, right? You're not a forensic pathologist, right?
That's true.
You don't work on dead bodies, right?
That's true.
Do you evaluate a lot of autopsies in your pediatric practice?
Yeah, but it has these two things.
No, not a lot.
Okay. As a matter of fact, today is and welcome, by the way. Today's the first day you're actually testifying in a courtroom.
That's true.
Okay. Are you aware that the autopsy report was amended? The death certificate was amended almost 1 year later.
Yes,
Okay. And do you recall why it was amended?
no,
You don't. Did you do any forensic examination of Corey?
no.
Did you review any slides from the autopsy?
I reviewed the slides from the autopsy.
Okay. You also reviewed a 33-second video, am I right?
Yes,
Okay. How many words, by the way, did you see Corey in that video?
no,
So if I'm a pediatric patient, right, and I walk into your office, is one of the things you want to do is look at me?
yes,
Okay. You would find that helpful, right?
absolutely.
Okay. Now, do you recall how many words Corey said in that 33-second video?
No, I don't recall. It wasn't very many.
Would it surprise you that it was 8?
No,
Were you able to make a medical diagnosis based upon a 33-second video that Corey Micciolo allegedly says 8 words and you can't see him?
no,
Now, you said something about the way, and I'm not a doctor, that it indicated to you that there was an acute stress response. I believe you said it released epinephrine?
epinephrine.
Epinephrine. Right? So, as you sit here now, were you able to determine what that acute stress response was caused by?
not able to determine, but I have an idea since
Now, is an idea within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, or is it just an idea?
no, it's with some medical certainty because the description of Corey when he presented was clear that he was extreme or in extremis, and that I have seen many times.
Okay. What does acute mean? Has a particular meaning, I'm assuming.
In general, it means in a short amount of time, but it's variable for different things.
What does that mean?
It means that when something happens, acute may be within the last 12 hours or it's used to describe a medical condition that comes on very suddenly.
But it could come on suddenly 12 hours ago?
It could.
24 hours ago?
It could.
So, I don't know if you've done this, but you're a pediatric infectious disease specialist. Have you ever had occasion to perform CPR on a 6-year-old?
Objection, Your Honor. Did we lay a foundation for emergency medicine with the doctor? She's an infectious disease specialist.
Well, she treats children, so the question is, did she ever have occasion to do that? I don't know if we get a foundation for that. It's an open-ended question, so it's acceptable to answer that.
I have performed CPR in the past, but I do not recall the ages of the children that I've participated in a resuscitation.
Well, what children ages do you normally treat? Let's do that way.
Really, all ages.
Okay. Now, Ms. Shaw just made a very, very good point in her objection. How much emergency room treatment do you perform?
I am not infrequently asked to evaluate children in the emergency department, but that's only after they've already been seen by an emergency room physician.
So do you have emergency room experience?
Only that which occurred during my training.
Which was, do we say 10 years ago?
We could say 10 years ago. I'd
Okay.
be fine with that.
So, you have no experience in forensic pathology. You have no experience in emergency room, whatever we would call it, care, yes, right?
That's right.
But you have performed CPR on children.
Many years ago, yes.
So, when you perform, do you know how to perform? I mean, it's many years ago, maybe you forgot. Do you know how to perform CPR on a child?
It's been many years since I've even certified to do it.
Okay. So you don't remember how to do CPR on a child?
Not specifically.
Okay. So for
I
sure.
couldn't teach it for sure.
But could you do it?
I imagine I could do it, but it doesn't come up in my daily physician service.
So if I was to ask you, doctor, can you explain to this jury how you perform CPR on a child? Would you be able to answer that?
Your Honor, she just said she can't teach it. She doesn't do it.
She said
It's
she
asked
can't
and
teach it.
answered in 3 different forms.
I mean, one additional time would be sufficient.
Say, could you repeat
Ms.
the
Holtz, can you
question?
repeat my question? Sure. Thank you.
So if I was to ask you, doctor, to explain to this jury how to perform CPR on a child, would you be able to do that?
No.
Oh. Do you know, only if you know, can CPR cause injuries?
Yes.
And where do they typically cause that injury?
To the sternum and ribs chest wall.
But you have no pathology experience, so if I asked you what percentage of autopsies do you see an injury to the heart and the lung, you wouldn't be able to answer that, right?
Objection, Judge. Counsel just answered his own question within the question.
I'll withdraw objection. Thank you. So, what's community pneumonia?
I believe that the expression you're trying to refer to is community-acquired pneumonia.
Okay. And can you tell me what that is?
It's pneumonia that's acquired in the community as opposed to pneumonia acquired in a patient who's hospitalized.
Okay. So would that be hospital-acquired pneumonia, otherwise known as HAP?
Yes. We usually call that nosocomial pneumonia.
What's that one?
Nosocomial.
Okay. So when a patient presents to a hospital, their initial diagnosis couldn't be HAP or hospital-acquired pneumonia. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Okay. But hospital-acquired pneumonia can develop between 12 and 24 hours later. Could it not?
Not by the definition. The definition is pneumonia that occurs 48 hours after an admission, a sustained admission to a hospital.
Okay. So, is your testimony that in order to get hospital-acquired pneumonia, somebody needs to be in a hospital for a sustained amount of time for at least 48 hours?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Judge. Oh, wait a minute. Let me speak. Mr. Farr. Okay. We're good.
Anything from the state?
Dr. Feingold, as an infectious disease specialist dealing with children, it's your job to look at blood results, correct?
Yes.
It's your job to look at test results, right?
Yes.
It's your job to look at everything, a case history, and determine if there's an infectious process present, correct?
Yes.
Or to rule it out, correct?
Yes.
And in this case, you were paid for your work to determine if you could rule it out, right?
Judge, I'm objection to the leading.
I mean, that's true. You should, if you're asking each question like right afterwards, you could ask her.
Dr.
more open-ended
Feingold,
question.
did you rule out any infection in this case? A pneumonia infection in this case?
Objection. Is that two questions or one question?
It's one
First one
question,
is-
Judge, it's a clarification.
That's back. Redirect as based upon the cross, so that's appropriate. It's overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
There, in reviewing everything I reviewed about this case and what I know from 40 years of taking care of children, 30 specifically taking care of children with infections and teaching others to recognize infections in children, there was no evidence in anything that I reviewed that there was any infection in this boy.
I have nothing else.
Any request?
How many VID children have you evaluated for infection?
Objection. Asked and answered. She said she tries to keep children alive, Judge. We've already covered this.
That's great.
The witness was called really for, she observed before the child's death, predominantly, right? That's the purpose of the state.
I'll withdraw the question.
Anything further from your side?
No, Your Honor. Thank you very much.
Doctor, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In my head, is that still on? Because I could easily leave it right here in the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Your excuse. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Does the state have any more witnesses of the shrub?
Your Honor, the state does not have any more witnesses, subject to moving certain items of evidence in or asking the court for permission to do that. The state would rest, and of course we reserve our right to call any witnesses on rebuttal if necessary and allowed by the court.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, then the state rests. Normally, then we would go to the defense witnesses. But what we did to try to avoid a waste of time is the parties agreed to call some of the defense witnesses in advance of the state's resting. So that's the people you heard from last week. So we're actually a few witnesses in the defense case, if you wanted to move that around in your mind, that like those witnesses just testified now, for instance. And it's not unusual. We sometimes do that because we try not to waste your time, even though I know I've said to you all along we've had some challenging scheduling issues with respect to this. So Dr. Feingold was the only witness scheduled for today. So then we're going to break from today till Friday morning. I'd ask you to report by 9:30 again now. I understand the parking situation is really challenging, so I apologize for that. I guess I could tell you to come in earlier so there's more parking available, but the whole point was that I didn't want you just waiting over at jury assembly. So use your discretion as to when you want to come in, but you don't need to be here till 9:30, and I apologize for that. I can only imagine how it's going to get worse. So they started construction on this vacant piece of land immediately north of us, and at the same time, this other project to close down half the parking garage, I guess, coincided with that. So it's been a challenge for everybody, and we appreciate your understanding. Again, please don't discuss the case amongst yourselves. Don't do any research. Don't look anything up. Don't read any news media or news articles about it. Don't have anyone do that for you. Please continue to maintain that distance with anyone about the issues in the case. Simply that you're a juror, you're coming back on Friday, no other information. Any documentation you need from jury assembly, clearly provide that for you for your employers or whatever. But don't be tempted by some pesky friend or family member to give them any information or to let them tell you anything. If anyone does say anything to you, please don't discuss it with your fellow jurors. Please tell us immediately when you come back here, and we'll learn how to address it. It's so very important every day, but the closer we get to the end, you can imagine if something happened, and all this whole month of May was a waste of time, and you got to scrap the whole process and start again. No one wants to do that, I'm sure at least of all you, but it wouldn't be fair to anybody involved. That's why it's so very important you follow my instructions. Anything from counsel before we release the jury for today?
No, Judge, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so much. Please remember all your belongings. Take care, sir. Okay. All right, it's 11:59. The jury has left the courtroom. We're still on the record. Anything from counsel at this point?
No, Judge, thank you very much.
1 second, Your Honor.
Sure.
Can we approach outside?
Sure. Thank you. Ms. Hopkins and Mr. Costello, Mr. Galucci raised with me at sidebar just his observation that Mr. Costello was taking pictures over towards Mr. Gregor when the jurors were coming in this morning. I saw that too. I wasn't concerned about it. He was concerned that perhaps as the jurors were walking in, you would have been able to capture some of them in the photographs. I've shared that in the past. You have been very good about allowing us to see the photos or avoiding that issue. No one's really asked me to take any action other than to remind you on the record. I don't know if you want to say anything, Mr. Costello, but I know you've been provided with the court's media order. You are aware of the AOC policy. You received permission from the trial court administrator's office that you had followed those guidelines. So I guess if I could respectfully just ask you to indicate on the record that you're not going to publish any photographs of any jurors if you did inadvertently capture a brief glimpse of someone or anything like that.
I would not, because it caused me a problem coming back in here.
I said the same thing at the sidebar, that knowing that the two of you have been doing this for decades, that you wouldn't want to jeopardize your access to the courtroom. So I thank you for clarifying that. I was observing it, and my observation was you were basically doing that as there were gaps in the line of jurors coming in. So I appreciate you clarifying that. Thank you. All right, is there anything from counsel at this point?
No, Judge, thank you.
All right, so we'll recess till Friday morning then?
Yes.
Yes, Judge, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. You can be, I'm going to need a minute to shut everything down.
I'll